Today is Sunday, May 25th, 2025, and this is episode 307 of the Defensive Security Podcast. My name is Jerry Bell, and joining me today, as always, is Mr. Andrew Kalat.
Good afternoon, Mr. Bell. I see you're at your undisclosed Southern Command location.
I am. My job, I actually have a new job. I am a designated beach chair holder downer.
Nice. And that's right on the Gulf of SpaceX debris, I understand. That's right. The current name.
That is correct. That is it.
Well, I applaud your chair holding down skills. And, I can't fault you too much because I just came back from a lovely Pacific island called Hawaii and for a much needed break. So I'm sorry I missed last week's show, but I'm here now.
And that is all that matters. So welcome back.
Thanks.
And also a reminder that the thoughts and opinions we express on the show are ours and not those of our employers. And a special call out to our very generous Patreon donors. Thank you so much for your support. And then, as we have been doing now for the past month or so, we're going to play another segment from a new sponsor. We're going to have to probably start recycling some of these sponsor spots, but
well, they pay for more than just one airing, but it's amazing how many new sponsors we've been getting, and I appreciate their support.
It's true, and it's amazing that Eds is so willing to pay that $500,000 per spot.
We got reach.
Yeah, yep. So anyway, without further ado, here it is.
Support for this podcast comes from the Global Institute for Cybersecurity Excellence and Strategic Threat Resilience, a forward-thinking nonprofit dedicated to advancing proactive cyber defense methodologies through synergistic policy frameworks, high-level stakeholder engagement, and unparalleled thought leadership. At Get Your Stir, we don't just react to cyber threats. We convene, we discourse, we redefine the conversation around digital security. Through exclusive invitation-only summits, deeply nuanced white papers, and a relentless commitment to buzzword innovation, we are shaping the future of cyber resilience, one high-level advisory panel at a time. Because real security isn't just about stopping hackers, it's about vision. It's about collaboration. It's about, mostly expensive conferences. Join the movement at getyourStir.global because cybersecurity isn't just a necessity, it's a thought space.
Okay. And, the best part about this is I have no idea which one I'm actually going to play right now. So that's all something I'll figure out later.
We'll fix it in post.
Yeah. So anyhow, welcome back, everybody. Sorry for the untimely missing a week. So, but, I had fun. I think you had fun, and that's what matters. So, we have some stories today. Some of them, by the way, I expect are going to raise my blood pressure a little.
Those are the ones I send you just to get you worked up.
Yes, you're very good at it, I've got to tell you. So the first story for today comes from the Register, and the title here is Coinbase confirms insider handed over data of 70,000 users. This has been well covered, I think, by the IT security press. And just as a little bit of background, back on December 26th, and by the way, this comes from public filings from Coinbase to the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission. And there's been some other kind of Q&A with reporters. So that's what this is based on. Some number of non-U.S. employees or contractors, is a little unclear how many and where they were or what their employment affiliation was, were apparently bribed on December 26th of 2024 to provide customer information of Coinbase's customers. So, and that in total was 69,461. Later, for Coinbase's part, they didn't understand that this had happened until May 11th of 2025. So it's quite a long time after. And it appears that the way they found out was because they were attempted to be blackmailed, right? So somebody demanded a $20 million ransom in exchange for not publishing the data that was stolen via bribe. And this is not a traditional kind of a hack, right? Like this is a dealing with disgruntled employees or people who are underpaid or what have you. We don't know, by the way, how much these employees or how much these people were paid in order to provide this information. That has not been made public. What has been made public is that Coinbase has decided that they're not going to pay the ransom. And in fact, they're going to take that $20 million ransom and they're turning it into a bounty. So a $20 million bounty for the arrest and conviction of the actors who performed this bribe and data theft. All of the employees or contractors involved have been fired, according to the reporting. The InfoSec media, that all the reports that I see seem to focus on how awesome it is, how amazing it is that Coinbase has opted to kind of go public with this on their own. And instead of paying the ransom, they're turning it into a bounty. And isn't that awesome? And look, I do applaud them for not paying the ransom. I think, as we've talked about so many times in the past, it's just like a moral hazard to pay a ransom like this. And I apologize if you can hear my cat. This is a much smaller space, and so I have a very. You know what I'm going to do? We're gonna have a Thor sighting. So here we go.
The mighty Thor.
This is the mighty Thor. He actually got his name because he meows so loud.
Aww. He's a good boy.
Thor is 19.
Wow, that is impressive.
And he is the reason that I do not get more than 4 hours of sleep at night. So even still. So anyhow, back on track. Now, there's a couple of interesting things that have been kind of coincidentally happening with Coinbase. One of them is that they replaced Discover Financial on the S&P 500 because Discover was just acquired by Capital One. I don't remember exactly who purchased them.
I think that's right.
And then the other is that they have come out, their CEOs come out and declared that he intends for Coinbase to be, quote, the financial services app for the masses. And I think it's safe to say, that the current U.S. administration is very pro crypto. I personally, as I've said many times in the past, I'm not okay with cryptocurrency. I think it's, I don't know. I just have a moral opposition to it, but maybe in 5 years I'll have a different perspective. Maybe it's also because I remember when Bitcoin was like a fraction of a penny and now it's $106,000. So that could be part of it too.
And we just didn't see the future like other people did. So we're bitter and angry.
Yeah. That's probably part of it. But one of the reasons I want to talk about this is not the cryptocurrency angle or necessarily the bribery angle, but what was missing here, right? The fact that this was able to happen in a financial services company is very concerning. And I certainly feel like at least part of the challenge here is that we have what are, again, effectively financial services companies or financial exchanges kind of reinventing the wheel at every step of the way. At the end of the day, one of the sales or one of the stated benefits is this kind of low friction, high efficiency. I'm not talking about power consumption or anything like that, but in terms of ability to process payments across borders, and it's not tied to any country's currency and on and on. The challenge I see is that we've had financial services companies for a long, long time. And there's been a lot of, I call it case law, right? But there's been a lot of controls that have organically built up around the handling of money in a financial services firm, even in its digital form, not because, it's just somebody wanted to do it, because these things have happened before. Right. And so this is not necessarily a new thing. And what frustrates me about this story is that, they're making mistakes. At least, all appearances are. And I don't know exactly what happened under the covers, but there is no good reason why some number of contractors would be able to steal the information of 70,000 employees. And by the way, that information included things like scanned copies of government-issued IDs and names and email addresses and mailing addresses. It didn't have things like passwords and private keys.
Just to clarify.
Sure.
I think you said 70,000 employees. It was 70,000 customers, right?
I'm sorry, 70,000 customers. Yep. You're right.
No worries.
You're right.
I'm here to keep you accurate, sir. Keep you accurate. That is my job. Nobody keeps me accurate.
It's fake news. Fake news.
Sorry, go on. I just wanted to clarify.
Sure. So anyhow, what is very concerning to me is the context of Coinbase. And I don't think Coinbase is necessarily alone in this, right? I think there's a lot of rapid innovation around cryptocurrency markets. And we're certainly starting to see some traditional banking or traditional financial services companies starting to jump into it. And I think that they'll probably apply a little more rigor and discipline than you might see, with the likes of Coinbase or perhaps, I guess, Robinhood might not be a great example, but I think you get what I'm saying. Like we're watching the evolution of this kind of new fork of financial services and they seem to be not having learned the lessons of the past. And so I feel like we're in for a lot more issues like this. And so my challenge to the crypto industry, not like the home miners and crap like that, individuals, I'm talking like the corporate companies, this is a solved problem in large measure. And, look to those best practices. Now, I know like that's kind of antithetical to the whole point of Bitcoin and crypto and whatnot, but we're going to keep seeing this happen. And I one of the reasons I deeply dislike cryptocurrencies is because it keeps getting stolen. Like it is like every freaking time I open the news, it's some other Bitcoin wallet or CryptoCoin wallet provider has been cleaned out. And it has been this way for the better part of a decade or more. And I don't see that problem getting any better. In fact, I actually see it getting worse. And so that's my charge to the industry.
So, kind of what I hear you saying is these folks who are jumping into the financial services world now are not heeding any of the lessons that have been hard fought and hard won by the other more traditional financial services providers that have already fought these battles and won. So what do you think some of the things are that they should be doing, or a company in general? Like this particular type of attack doesn't have to be limited just to a crypto company. This could happen to anybody's customer support organization that somebody could try to bribe them. So what do you see as valid potential defenses against that sort of threat?
So it's a great question. And I would say having a robust insider threat program, it's kind of tuned to the level of sensitivity. Now, this would be a different situation if it were like a support organization and they had information, they had like names and email addresses and whatnot. But even there, like I have worked in many support organizations, and it is kind of standard practice, even outside of the financial services area, that you only have access to the customer information of a customer who you are assigned to support. And you do not have the ability to assign yourself to a customer.
Right. So they support folks had wide-ranging access to all customer records, and there was no rigor or monitoring or controls around that.
Well, again, that's the theory. That's the appearance.
That we're working on. Yeah.
Yes, it's the appearance. Like the fact that it happened, and the only way they learned that it happened was that they were blackmailed. Like they didn't. It's not like they had some sort of audit log where they did some periodic checking and found it themselves.
Right.
So I can only assume that they were that whole concept is missing, but I could be wrong.
But even if not,
look like it.
Regardless of the reality on the ground at Coinbase, it's still a valid recommendation for other companies to, hey, this sort of threat exists. Here's an example of it. And by the way, if somebody's going to blackmail you for $20 million, as long as they're spending less than that on bribing your staff, they probably feel they have a good ROI, assuming they think there's a good chance that they will get paid that bounty. Or not bounty, but blackmail. So that's the one that's a little more interesting to me in this case of not necessarily the crypto angle or the lack of adherence to some existing financial standards. Because to be fair, I also have a lot of problems with, I think we have a story later in the show, with some of the financial industry being so driven by compliance-based security policy that they're not adapting to current threats. And we'll talk about that when we get there. So I think there's some downsides to the way certain financials do it, in the way that they're driven by their regulators and they only want to do the things that the regulators tell them to do. So they're only as good as the regulators let them be in some ways. So, I mean, I'm a little bit more free market than you in this, I think, in that I don't mind new companies trying new things. And sometimes I think regulators are an unfortunate and overburdensome drag at times. But here's the flip side. And how do we account for that? And part of this is, caveat emptor, I'm not pronouncing that correctly, but the buyer beware. The buyer needs to make their choices and need to be educated on the risks and decide if that risk is worth it to them and how do they mitigate that risk. But they can't know what that corporation is doing in the back end. They have to trust. And that's where the regulators typically come in. And there's so many moving pieces. But I come back to, how would a generic company protect themselves from their support organization being bribed? And I think you're starting to touch on some good things. Have good monitoring of what support agents are looking at and have thresholds that alert, limit their ability to look at records that are not involved in the case that they're at, have an audit trail of that, treat your support people well might matter a little. Although that could be tough. If we're playing a game of money, a bad actor who really wants in could probably outspend you. So
yes,
there's that challenge. So I don't know. What any other sort of insider threat things you think of that might apply here?
I think you hit on a lot of them. Looking, for example, your support agents probably shouldn't have a database, like the ability to run arbitrary queries. And perhaps if they do, then there should be some sort of limitations on that. And I think in large measure, a lot of this stuff can be implemented without materially slowing them down. Like, I would question if a support agent needs arbitrary access to all of your customer information all at the same time. Like, what's wrong with your process?
Well,
it just doesn't.
It's easier, right? To design something more rigorous is complicated and costly and time consuming, and it slows people down. They need to be agile, Jerry.
I suppose so.
Look, if your support team isn't contortionists, you're not 10xing.
10xing is like so 2020. Like, we got to be at like 15 or 20x right now, right?
Well, inflation has been pretty substantial, so
that's a good point. We should be way past 10x by now.
Okay, so we're gonna in 2020x, they need a 10x.
There you go.
So it's like $20 versus 2025. We'll find a. Anyway, I'm just saying.
All right, so let's move on to the next story, which also comes from the Register, and this one will also get my blood going here. The title is "Go ahead and ignore Patch Tuesday. It might improve your security." I don't even know what to say. I just don't even know what to say.
Wrong.
So this is based on an interview with a vice president from Gartner, and I can only assume one of two things. Number one is the person was trying to be intentionally salacious in order just to get the name of an increasingly irrelevant company
Wait,
out.
People do that? That's a thing?
I know it's crazy. And then the other is that it was misinterpreted. Like this article is based on a discussion, and like the way it was received is not what the person intended to convey. I can only hope that it's one of those two things. So anyhow, the kind of the overarching thesis of the article from this interview with the person from Gartner is that we can't keep up with patches, and that like every discussion they have with their customers of all different scales agrees with that statement. Like we just can't keep up, and intuitively know that there are more and more patches every day. So like why even try? And I'm kind of paraphrasing. And I just have a deep problem with that. And I'll get into why. And so maybe this is what they had hoped, because now we're talking about something that Gartner put out. But you know what? I can't let it go. I just can't let it go.
And I believe I actually sent you the story. So it was kind of my fault.
You did. And yeah. I had to go kick something after I read it.
I hope your wife is okay.
No, she kicks me, and then I have to go kick something else. So there's a quote in here. I'll just read it, kind of verbatim. Patches break things, he said, and he is this person from Gartner, or are so complex to implement that the work may not be worth it. You can't patch Java because there might be 5 other subsystems that need to patch before you patch Java. Now look, I think that's true, but I also think that we're kind of conflating, like we're treating the entire spectrum of patches as like one uniform whole. And I don't think that's correct. And so if you talk about patches that you to components or programming languages or libraries that you have to integrate in to your code base and that require changing how things are written or how things operate, that's a different thing. And I would postulate you have to kind of think about the patch management process differently than the patches that Microsoft puts out every month or the many other vendors do.
So vulnerability management is not the same as patch management.
Correct. So there's another quote in here that I think further illustrates it. Lawson is the person, that's the name of the person from Gartner, thinks organizations try to implement all patches anyway, sometimes to meet internal metrics for speedy patching or to ensure they meet regulatory compliance requirements. But such practices haven't led to a decrease in successful attacks. So there's that last sentence I think is particularly important to talk a little bit about, because I don't know that we should be thinking about patching as the sole reason for not having a decrease in successful attacks.
Yeah. How do you prove the negative?
Right. There's so many confounding factors. There's more threat actors. There's the ecosystem of malware has changed, radically. We have many, many, many more security researchers than we have in the past, and almost more every day. And they're all writing proof of concept code that gets published. And so there's a lot of confounding factors that I would say are kind of orthogonal to the whole notion that this is evidence that the failure of successful attacks going down is evidence that patching just doesn't work. I think anyway, you get the point.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. And I have so many thoughts that I'm trying to organize them coherently. And you would think after 568,000 shows, I might be able to do that better than I can. But no, the problem that I have with that statement is, one, it feels very marketing heavy. It feels like somebody pitching a solution, not real world dealing with, they talk about this in boardrooms. Well, to be fair to boardrooms, these are executives who are divorced from the process, who are very distant from it, who are asking tough questions and may not have, just because they're asking questions doesn't mean it's a good question. Let's just say that. So the challenge that I have with this is you can't prove how many attacks we avoided by patching on a regular basis. You can't prove, unless you did a true side-by-side A/B comparison with a a sample population of companies in a similar environment, and said, hey, you guys don't patch for the next, 365 days, and let's compare, versus somebody who does have a patch management program. I see my environments that I secure constantly being scanned all the time for missing patches that would be likely exploited if they were found. So I can use that metric as a counter. Look how many of these attacks I have defended against by appropriately patching against vulnerabilities. The other thing is, this is somewhat like, hey, we had a lot of problem with people breaking through the windows. Great, we put bars on the windows. Okay, now they're coming in through the front door. You haven't done anything. No, that's not true. I stopped one avenue of attack, right? So the bad actors get a vote, and they're shifting to other attack types. That doesn't mean that my initial defense mechanism that I put in place isn't valid and I should stop doing that. It's a very frustrating position. I think there is some wisdom here in that not every vulnerability turns into a threat. Not every vulnerability is exploited. And he talks about that in the article, that something like 8 to 9% of vulnerabilities is exploited. The problem is we don't know which 8 to 9%. If we could predict that and only patch those, we would be ahead of the game. But this reminds me a little of an old story from World War II about bombers would come back with holes in them. And they'd say, oh, these are the places we need to add more armor. And somebody finally realized, no, these are the places that can sustain the hits. You need to add armor in other places where they're not surviving. So it's a survivorship bias kind of argument, if I'm using the right term, around this concept of, oh, well, we're still getting hit, so therefore this must be ineffective. It's just, it's a frustrating article. See, now you've gotten my blood up after I got your blood up. But the problem that I really have too is that somebody at an executive level is going to read this. And there is an interesting quote in here about, hey, we need to look at alternative defense mechanisms and means. Okay, cool. I don't disagree. But are you pimping for somebody's live patch WAF? Is that part of what this is? Like you heard from some IDS vendor or WAF vendor that they could do inline live patching and that's how you defend. It's the same flipping game that we've seen for 30 years.
Fully expected like the closing paragraph to be about like a virtual patch WAF kind of thing, but it wasn't there. There's another quote in here, and I'm just not finding it right now, but I'll paraphrase it, and it is that threat actors aren't focusing on the critical vulnerabilities anymore. They're weaponizing lower severity vulnerabilities, and I certainly think that's true. To an extent, like we actually do see critical vulnerabilities being exploited. Just look at any of the spate of firewall vulnerabilities that have been, coming out as of late. It's also true that there's been a lot of vulnerabilities that are, moderates that have, especially the ones that have been kind of chained together. But I would again say that this is the wrong way to think about it, right?
Yeah, one of the ways of better patching of highs and criticals?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Are we doing a good job? Because like most security programs, most security policies and frameworks and compliance regimes and regulations have something that looks like 30-day for criticals and highs and 60 days for mediums and 180 days for low. Like there's obviously variations in there. But most of the industry tends to focus first on those criticals. And so I think it should not be surprising that we see less focus or we see less success. I'm not going to say we see less focus. We might see less success in exploiting criticals. And I think that the threat actors, they're intelligent adversaries. They're going to go where they know they're going to have success. And if that is focusing on the mediums, then like that's where they're going to go. And I also think there's a lot of opportunistic aspect to this. Like, what do they have the ability to exploit? Like, what is not every vulnerability, by the way, is easy to exploit. Just because it's super critical doesn't mean that it's trivial.
Correct.
To exploit. I have a big problem with this, and you really. You said the concern that I had, like the underlying concern is that this is going to get read by executives, by CEOs and CFOs, and they're going to say, why the hell am I spending so much focus and labor and whatnot on patch management? Like Gartner, the paragon of IT thought leadership, is telling me that like this is a silly thing to do, and I'm here pushing back really hard on that.
Yeah. Here's the last thing I'll say on this. Maybe the last thing. There's value in keeping things patched, because keeping things on current versions as an ongoing regular process spreads the pain out and spreads the workload out. And, you could say something like, hey, you need to keep all of your stuff at least N-2 from current major version. So you need to be within 2 major versions of whatever is out current. There's a lot of value in that beyond just patch management around vulnerabilities. There's currency against, hey, support levels. There's currency against, if I do have a patch, sometimes those patches don't apply to older versions that I need to apply. If I have vulnerabilities that are suddenly getting massively exploited and I have an urgent patch I need to put out there, the closer I am to current, the easier it is typically to apply that patch. It's less disruptive. So I think there's a lot of value in maintaining currency across your entire ecosystem for the eventuality when you do have to apply an urgent patch.
Yeah, 100%. 100%. You're digging yourself a debt hole if you don't. There were 2 other quotes in here. One I like, one I hate. So the one I hate, quote, "You don't make a population healthy by giving everyone an aspirin." He said, "You give them an individual treatment." And I think that's the wrong way to think about it.
I've heard of this thing called a vaccine.
Yeah, that's exactly what was in my mind. Like, this is not like a surgery thing. This is more like a vaccine thing. So that's point number 1. And then the one that I did like was very last sentence in the article: "The reality is patching sucks for everyone." I think we can all get on board with that statement.
Put on a helmet, get in the game. Sorry, I don't know what to tell you.
All right, next story. This one comes from Bleeping Computer. And the title here is "Ransomware Gangs Increasingly Use SkitNet Post-Exploitation Malware." This is kind of down in the weeds, but SkitNet is a kind of an up-and-coming crimeware kind of platform as not ransomware, but crimeware as a service. What resonated with me, the reason I wanted to talk about it, is it has some features, and keeping in mind that this is a platform that bad actors can rent, right? It is prepackaged. You can go and pay on a monthly basis to use this thing. And it has features like DNS-based communications, right? And the ability to evade most kinds of EDR and antivirus. Now, that's, as we know, an arms race, and so like it might not be true at any given time. But what I thought was most novel is not necessarily the capabilities of this, but that the tactics that this uses are what we would have called, let's say 5 or 10 years ago, highly advanced in the realm of like the most, among the most sophisticated threat actors. And now we have this, this commercial, if I can use that word, platform for adversaries to use, which really ups the game for the threat actors and makes it much, much more difficult for the defenders, unless you have a very sophisticated capability of like monitoring for anomalous DNS queries, which is honestly not a common thing. And I'm sure I'm going to get lots of emails saying, "Oh, like we've been doing this since 1974. So whatever, right? Not a lot of companies do. But anyway, that's really what I wanted to say. Like I've talked about this in the past. Threat actors, writ large, are learning from each other. And one of the kind of trajectories that we see in this landscape is the commoditization of all these kind of what I'll call best practices. So now we're seeing less sophisticated actors having access to quite sophisticated tools. We've seen this for a while with Cobalt Strike and whatnot. And this is yet another example where, the down market, if I can say that, down market threat actors have some pretty sophisticated capabilities now.
There's an upside. The more they centralize the same technique and tactics, the easier it is to, dare I say, inoculate the population with EDR vendors building in focus detections for that type of technique.
It's true. It's a good point.
But
it's a very good point. Anyway, there's
it's not like giving them an aspirin, right? I mean, it's
very true.
But to your point, yes, things keep getting more sophisticated. And as we've said before, and we're not just hand waving to get the cloud out, AI is going to make this easier, and it's going to get even more complicated. So it's always an arms race. But if we think back to the early days till now, we could probably say this same iteration has happened over and over and over and over and over again. And it's just everybody's continually leveling up or at least adjusting, shifting to new and different techniques on a regular basis.
Yeah, for sure. So the article has links to some IOCs. Look, I think there's only a couple of threat actors that are referenced actually being seen using this. There was another quote in here that I thought was pretty interesting, because we've, for I think over a decade now, have kind of railed against the whole idea of attribution, or at least attribution is like a hyper important aspect of a security program. And one of the comments they make is that tools like SkitNet make attribution much more difficult, because now you have this quasi sophisticated or advanced capability that can be used by nation state adversaries and, the people trying to hack into Ed's bait and dial up to get some free minnows.
Look, can you blame them?
No, I can't. I'm definitely not. Okay, so moving right along. Our next story comes from
I think
Dark
he is
Reading.
announcing a minnows and minutes promotion coming up soon.
Ooh, so like a bundle?
30 minnows with 30 minutes of dial-up access.
That is innovation right there. Innovation. Our next story comes from Dark Reading, and the title here is Why Rigid Security Programs Keep Failing.
This is kind of what I was talking about earlier when we were talking about financials. Please.
So this one also gave me a migraine. It just, and look, the migraine is still there.
It's amazing that you keep accepting my emails, inviting me back to the show with all the pain I cause you.
So the thesis of this story is actually something that you alluded to earlier, that too much process kind of hampers or inhibits the effectiveness of a security program. And I think that is true, contextually true. And kind of like the vulnerability discussion, I'm not sure that it's universally true. So just as an example, a lot of the examples and focus of this article are on incident response teams and SOC analysts or monitoring functions, and he uses the point that in his experience, one of his customers, I guess, or company he was involved in, suffered a breach, and one of the reasons that the breach was worse than it could have been is because the SOC team was too busy trying to escalate something they saw, which they knew was malicious, rather than just going off and doing incident response. And so, that is an example where their process got in the way and caused harm because they were too busy trying to conform to this documented process. And so I certainly think that is intuitive. It makes sense. I can't argue with that. But I've now, having come from a very large organization, I can say that if you don't have process, especially if you have more than like 2 or 3 people on your team, it becomes difficult to have a consistent outcome or like any kind of outcome, because like people are people. Humans are weird. I'm not going to lie. And so like you may have some awesome rock star people who the process inhibits, and you may have some others, if they don't have that process, they're going to create a whole new spectrum of challenges for you. And so that's why I struggle with this, because I can kind of see both sides of the fence from where I've been. I will say that this whole concept that he's raising here is predicated on having like really talented people. And I don't know that everybody has the luxury of having, like the top incident response people and the top SOC analysts in the world. Like I which would allow you to just kind of take the gloves off and let them go do their thing. There's a comment in here about how, incident response usually quickly turns into, visibility management or brand management. And I certainly think that's true. But I also will say that I think that's kind of orthogonal to the idea of having process or not. Like the drive of a senior management team in the context of an incident isn't going to change because you say, oh, like I have the top incident response person in the world working on it. And by the way, he doesn't have any processes to encumber his reaction. What is that going to cause? How is your CEO going to take that?
Plus, you don't benefit from prior learning. If you're not improving your process with each best practice that you learn, it's not portable knowledge at that point. You're having to reinvent the wheel over and over and over again. There's certainly something to be said here to have flexibility in the process and don't hamstring folks with too much process that they can't be effective. That's just a badly designed process. But to throw the baby out with the bathwater doesn't make sense to me.
Correct.
If your playbook is so slow and unwieldy that you're getting your ass kicked by the time you get through steps 27 before you can take the effort, you have a faulty process. But at the same time, if you've got junior analysts who have no guidance and no playbook to follow, what do you think they're going to do?
Yeah, what happens when your top people are on vacation or sick or just left and you have to hire someone to replace them? So I again, I can see both sides of the fence here, but I am, this to me feels like I have a big problem with agile, or at least agile as it's implemented in many organizations, because it feels like a lot of companies have taken this notion of agile and they embrace the parts that they like, which is the no pre-planning and like almost no testing or testing, and you kind of push testing into the user population and they ignore like the whole rest of the ecosystem. And I feel like this article is also has that same challenge. Like in the context of a properly designed environment, this makes eminent sense. However, having said that, I still think you have to have some policy or process that defines like how people need to act. And I will also say that I don't think this concept is explicit and uniform across the whole spectrum of IT security. Like, do you really want to kind of leave it to the whoever to figure out which patches to apply or where to apply them? I mean, maybe some people will do a great job, right? And I don't doubt that some people will do an awesome job, but others won't. Like they'll skip patches because like they've got a place to be tonight, or it's gonna, as the previous story talked about, like it's gonna require you to go rewrite some Java crap, and so like you're just gonna throw it overboard. Like that's, I again, I'm sympathetic, but I think it has to be tempered with reality.
The other angle I see on this story is, and I saw this when I worked with large financial companies. I was just saying earlier, they're very beholden to what the regulators are comfortable with. Mm-hmm. And much like PCI becomes the limit of how far I'll take my security program, not the base level, I saw similar things in financials where, well, what are my regulators going to test me against? And what are they going to hold me accountable for? Well, that's as far as I want to go. And yeah, I know you've got this newfangled idea, but the regulators aren't comfortable with that. They don't know enough about that. We're not going to explore that because it's not on the regulators' radar right now. And there's a flip side to that, which is often I think they're a little further behind the state of the threat actors because they don't innovate rapidly because they have a very rigid program around that compliance requirement.
But how many companies, I mean, look, I don't mean to belittle people here, but how many companies really have, organizations really have the ability to kind of end to end define all of those things on their own? And I just don't know. I mean, there's some, and I don't know. I'm not disputing that, but I think there are a lot of organizations that have, kind of low sophistication teams, like especially where, like you've got, I don't know how many companies are there where you've got like the help desk and the sysadmin team and the security team are the same people.
Yeah, that's fair. Yeah.
There's a lot. And the other concept that he talks about in here is he started to get into it, was how a lot of organizations are kind of responsive to audits and compliance programs. And I will say, having sat in the hot seat, there are two threat actors. I mean, there's at least two threat actors. One threat actor are the bad guys that want to hack into you and steal your data or money or whatever. The other threat actor are the auditors. Like I don't think you should minimize, the importance of that. Like I have worked for a chief operating officer, and like you get hacked, I'm going to fire you. You fail an audit, I'm going to fire you. Like that's the reality of the world that we live in. Now they have very different implications in terms of like organizational impact. No question there, but from an internal importance standpoint, audits, maybe they shouldn't be. And I'm not going to discount that. Maybe they shouldn't carry that much weight. Right. But they do.
Well, it's interesting. One of the worst CISOs I've ever worked for had a very adversarial relationship with the auditors, and he would lie, cheat, and steal and fabricate evidence as a game to pass audits. I'm like, that's certainly not serving anybody's purposes.
No. And, I've worked in companies where if, again, it depends on the auditors, right? Like I've worked where I last worked, we had some stellar auditors, and they would find stuff. They would literally find stuff that you hadn't thought of before.
Well, that's good. That's what you want.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
But it shouldn't be punitive, right? It should be, what should be punitive is, hey, you've been flagged on this 3 times and your leadership has ordered you to fix this, and you were provided budget and resources and a timeline, and you failed. That should be punitive.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. That is a hard, I would just say that is a hard culture. I mean, look, I was, high up in the organization, and that was frankly something that I was not successful in changing, that perception, because that perception just runs so deep. You have this, quote, independent auditor telling you that you have these problems. Like, what the hell am I paying you for, Jerry? Like, what are you doing? So anyway, all that to say that the auditors aren't the hackers, but if you are a CISO or in leadership and you have audit problems, it's going to feel similar. So anyway, moving on. Next story comes from Dark Rating as well. The title here is The Hidden Cybersecurity Risks of... Gosh, I've been involved in, I cannot tell you how many mergers or acquisitions, I should say.
Thor has opinions on mergers and acquisitions.
Thor has some strong opinions. I'm going to bring him over to help me with this story.
Mm-hmm.
Every one of them has been challenging from a security perspective. And the point of this is that businesses look at acquisitions and mergers as a means of increasing revenue, decreasing costs. Those are typically the main drivers. So when they look at things, when they look at that transaction through a risk lens, they think about like, okay, how am I going to minimize the challenges of... Sorry, I got a claw stuck in my side and it's hurting. How are we going to minimize the? Okay, Thor. There we go. Sorry. Back on track.
It's okay.
How are we going to minimize the downside risks to those challenges? How are we going to, or those opportunities? How are we going to make sure that we gain the revenue that we built our business case on, or save the amount of money that we built our business case on. And the point of this article is that too often we don't factor in the risks, that cybersecurity risks that come along with these transactions. And, speaking from personal experience, which I think aligns with the author's experience too, a lot of times the acquired company that you're engaging with, or one side or the other, has had some problems that may not. Because look, everybody's very motivated. They're very excited. There's a big payday coming, or they're scared, or what have you. And so they have their happy ears on. They have their rose-colored glasses on, and they might not necessarily be talking about the ransomware attack that they had 6 months ago. And in the context of, let's just hypothesize a large company buying large public company buying a smaller private company. The baggage, the security baggage that acquired company can bring in can magnify the intensity or the problems of whatever happened, because it might not have been something that a regulator or a lawyer or whatever would have thought to be worth pursuing. But now that you are part of a much larger organization, those problems become that much larger organization. And so that larger organization has a lot more downside. Like, they can be fined or sanctioned in some way as a result of what their acquired company did before the acquisition. And so that's the point. The other, it's not stated in here, but I think the more common problem that I've seen, and I think you've seen it too, is not properly planning the security integration, or I'm not saying that right, not properly funding the security operation of the resulting entity. Because what tends to happen, and again, I've been at the seat, so I've seen this. I've actually been on both sides of this, or all three sides of it. What tends to happen is these agreements are conceptualized, and they're predicated on some amount of savings. Usually there's some amount of savings. Like, if we smash these two companies together, we're going to be able to save 30%. Like, we'll be able to reduce SG&A by 30% or 50% or 70%, whatever, right? Some percentage. And then that becomes a hard target. Like, you've got to fix that. You've got to meet that. But one of the challenges is in no cases that I've personally had experience with was the security function, and in many cases even the IT function, contemplated in what that savings would be. They just take like the entirety of SG&A and they lop it off, and there's no recognition. And so inevitably there's some challenges that come along, and now they come to you as the security person, and the business will say, like, you've got to cut 30% or 50% or what have you. And you're like pulling your pockets inside out saying, like, I don't have that to give. That doesn't exist, but it still has to be done. And I think that's the more common problem, because it's happened every single time that I've been involved in a merger acquisition.
100% agreed, and similar experiences. And typically what I see as well, let me back into this a different way. The way I would do it is understand that, as painful as it can be, the quicker you can unify under the same model and the same infrastructure and the same tooling, the better. And the longer you linger with differences, and, well, it's different because this is a company Z versus company Y. We haven't gotten to that yet, and we don't have the staff to work on that. The more gaps and differences and changes that you have and exceptions you have, the harder it is from a security perspective to remember and know those things. If you don't have the same technology and the same monitoring and the same visibility, you can't have the same playbooks, you can't have the same runbooks. So you've got these big unknown gaps. And what happens is often, well, we don't want to change anything right away. Look, I'm all about ripping that Band-Aid off and getting it done. I understand this is what you're comfortable with. I'm sorry, you've been bought by another company. We have ways of doing things. It sucks, but let's get through the pain fast. However, your way of doing things is no longer viable because we have to be on a unified approach if we're going to be able to assure the level of security that we have across the organization. And typically, when we don't do that with an acquisition, executives have no idea the risk they're accepting, especially when you start merging accounts or IAM across the orgs. And now you've got this new org that came in, you've merged some of your tools together, but not all of them. And this theoretically less secure or differently secure environment has got access to now some of the same IAM, the same credentials. They are now putting the rest of the organization at risk if you haven't brought them up to the same standard you've got across the board, or at least the same ability to run the same playbooks. I'm kind of dancing around this because I don't want to say too much from specific circumstances I'm not allowed to say. Not that it's super secret, it's just ethically wrong to talk about that. So in my perfect world, which rarely exists, security should have the funding, the mandate, and the ability to say, this is our security stack. It must be enforced on the new property within X number of months. And by the way, that's going to affect all these other timelines on the project. You need a staff and a lot for that. You can't just do this run rate as BAU when you've got all this other stuff going on. And otherwise, you have all these weird exceptions that you have to manage through for years and years and years and years. And you've got big gaps in your security. It's a bit of a hot button for me.
Yeah, I would go further and also say, because I've seen it talked a little bit about in the article as well. Before you do that integration, you really need to establish some level of confidence. Like even if the intention is to at some point migrate them away. Like I have firsthand experience with company A acquiring company B, and company B has a threat actor active in their environment. And when you go and you integrate those two, now the threat actor in B has access, at least some level of access, into company A, which typically is much larger and perhaps a juicier target. And so I think it's worth the diligence if you're able to. But again, I think it's incumbent on leaders, because this is a problem that's really hard to solve down in the engine room. This is something that the leadership of I'm talking to like the directors and the CIOs and the CISOs here, and that level, you've got to intercept this early on, and you've got to be part of that program. Otherwise you're going to have trouble. And as is everything in the security world, it's all calculated risk. So a company may say, you know what, screw you, we're not going to do that. We're charging ahead. You're not in the cone of silence. You'll find out what's going on when everybody else is, and you're at the end of the whip. And that might be the case. And you'll have to pick up the pieces, but if you have the opportunity, you can save yourself a whole lot of pain and your organization a whole lot of pain, especially as it pertains to like these ridiculous budget challenges that come up every goddamn time.
Not to mention, let's say you have competing security vendors that are in the organization A and organization B, and then all the sales reps and executives and friends of friends and boards circulating around and trying to get you to adopt whatever. And
oh God, yes.
This is our standard. Get out of my way. This is not something we're going to re-examine right now. This is what we do. This is how we do it. But everybody's looking for that opportunity to displace and consolidate and replace. And they're very good at whispering in executives' ears. And if I hear the current mantra of consolidate one more time, I'm going to just rip my hair out.
All right. We have a bonus story today.
Bonus story?
A bonus. Yeah, normally we do 5.
Right.
But we got one more today, which I thought was worth talking about. This one comes from the Register, and the title here is, "You think ransomware is bad now? Wait until it infects CPUs."
My.
Mic drop.
Cat drop.
Fortunately, he is disconnected from my shirt and is now off somewhere else. I don't know. So this is a story about a security researcher who weaponized a recent bug in the AMD Zen chips, AMD Zen CPUs. And it was inspired by some things that had been in the recent news, and basically came up with a proof of concept whereby the ransomware actually exists inside the CPU. And the example, to give you a taste of what's possible, they use the example that someone came up, and I think it's the inspiration for this person's project. Somebody used the same vulnerability to alter the random number generator in the CPU to always return the number 4. So to just gives you an idea of like the kinds of things that are possible. So that might give you an idea of how it could be weaponized to create some sort of ransomware. I'm a little skeptical about how sophisticated the ransomware could be. Like, could it actually be multi-platform? I don't really know. We know that there's been, and it's referenced in this article, that there's been some interest in creating EFI-based malware for quite some time. They talk about, I think it's the Conti ransomware group in one of their data dumps, were having internal discussions about trying to port their ransomware into EFI. And that was several years ago. So like, who knows how far along they are, but the net is this is a kind of a whole new genre of ransomware. We've seen now this attacking again EFI, and we've seen it in GPUs and in the the management controllers on on especially servers. But up until now, I've not seen anything that's actually attacking the CPU directly. But this is one of those things where if it's successful and it picks up steam, like you could end up having a lot of junk equipment. And, as an industry, we're not really in a place to defend against this. One thing that I love about this article, and there's so much bloviating in the security world by security researchers, but this one seems to be pretty down to earth. His point was that, this is a really bad attack. But like, let's not focus on the reality. Like, in order to weaponize this, they have to get in. And before we start worrying about this, like, really edge case thing, we should be focusing on the fundamentals that allow, the security fundamentals that would allow someone to execute an attack like this. Like, that's before we worry too much about ransomware on CPUs, we should be focusing our time and attention on making sure that we've done everything we can do to address the fundamental security requirements in an effective way. And I think this person deserves a gold star for that comment.
I agree. The other thing that was occurring to me during this is it's probably not just CPUs, GPUs and other type similar devices in likely could be attacked as well. And GPUs are kind of such a fast evolving environment.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder if, I don't know anything about the creation of CPUs and GPUs, but it just feels like from an attack surface perspective, GPUs have so much more innovation going on and are faster integrated and innovating and swapping out. So I don't know, maybe GPUs are another target.
Absolutely. This is attacking the microcode, the fact that you can update the microcode in CPUs.
Mm-hmm.
The funny thought I had as I was reading the quote typically only chip manufacturers can provide the correct microcode for their CPUs, which they might do to improve performance or fix holes. And I got to thinking, like, when is the last time a manufacturer has improved the performance of an in-the-field CPU? I cannot think of one.
Indeed.
I'm so used to the post Spectre meltdown world of these updates only making things slower. Anyhow, gotta create that market for the next the CPU. Anyhow, that is. Yeah. Oh, do you have anything more to say on this one?
No, not really. I think you covered it well. As always, new and exciting novel threats on the horizon.
Yeah. Watch the space. But again, as the researcher, it's Christian Beek is the name of the researcher, as that person says, keep focusing on the fundamentals. Let's not take our eye off that ball. So I think that's good advice. And with that is our stories for this week. Thank you very much for your time, and I hope this was useful to you. Again, if you want to support our mission, you can donate to our Patreon. That is patreon.com/defensivesec. I'll put a link to that in our show notes. And speaking of show notes, you can find links to all of the stories we talk about on our website at defensivesecurity.org. Just look for episode 307 and you'll find links to all these. If you love our podcast, or even if you don't love our podcast, refer us to a friend. And look, if you don't like us, you could refer us to someone that you don't like. Like, it doesn't, you kind of see where I'm going with this, right? Like, you don't just have to only refer it if you think we're good.
Look, the more people that we can tell Ed that we have listening to the show, the better. So all engagement is good engagement.
That's right. That's right. He, those night crawlers are apparently a booming business. And I feel like we're in on the ground floor with Ed. So
I think he's offering a free port scan with every purchase of your 5th box of night crawlers.
Yep. And he puts, by the way, he puts your dial-up connection behind a net. So it's super secure.
Is that a GNAT?
Both.
I see.
Yeah. Both. Anyhow, you can find me on my wonderful Mastodon server at it's Jerry at infosec.exchange. And where can they find you?
Same at your infosec.exchange, at Lerg, L-E-R-G, and also on X, at Lerg, L-E-R-G, and also on LinkedIn. But if you're a salesperson trying to sell me something on LinkedIn, I'll probably ignore you.
Good advice. All right, with that, we will talk again next week. Thanks, everybody.
Have a great week. Bye-bye.
Bye.